A U.S. president just threatened to block the opening of a multi-billion-dollar international bridge, not because of structural failure, not because of safety inspections, but because he says the United States must be fully compensated. That claim immediately turns an infrastructure project into a geopolitical dispute. And when infrastructure becomes political, the question is never just about concrete. It is about leverage. So before reacting to tone or volume, we need to examine structure. According to major reporting outlets, the international bridge connecting Windsor, Ontario to Detroit, Michigan has been financed by Canada, even though it connects directly into the United States. Depending on whether reporting is framed in US dollars or Canadian dollars, the cost is described as roughly 4.6 to 4.7 billion US dollars, or around 6 billion Canadian dollars and above. Different currencies, same financial reality. Canada financed the build. Our ore, according to public statements, is shared between Canada and the state of Michigan. American steel and American workers were involved in construction. These are documented elements of the project. They are not rhetorical interpretations. They form the baseline. So when a demand for compensation is introduced, it collides with an established funding structure. Canada financed the construction. Ownership is shared across the board. American labor and materials were part of the project. That factual framework matters, because once the financial premise weakens, the dispute shifts away from money. It shifts toward authority. The key development is not the cost. It is the permit. Reporting has indicated that presidential authority over the cross-border permit could be amended. That detail is procedural, but it is powerful. International infrastructure operates under executive authorization. Bridges that cross national boundaries are not just physical structures. They are legal constructs, and legal constructs depend on executive approval. Access to it is. When access becomes uncertain, negotiations change. The focal point moves from financing to timing. It moves from ownership to authorization. It moves from engineering to executive discretion. That is the leverage mechanism. This does not automatically mean escalation. It does not automatically mean disruption. It means a pressure point exists. And pressure points matter when they intersect with economic networks. The Windsor to Detroit corridor is not symbolic. It is one of the most economically significant trade routes in North America. Billions of dollars in goods move through that region every year. Automotive components move back and forth multiple times before final assembly. Agricultural exports rely on predictable crossings. Energy shipments depend on uninterrupted flow. Advanced manufacturing supply chains operate on tight schedules. These systems do not absorb uncertainty easily. Predictability is their foundation. When access to a crossing becomes questionable, supply chains begin recalculating. Manufacturers evaluate risk. Logistics planners build contingencies. Investors reassess timelines. This is not emotional reaction. It is structural response. Regional business organizations have already warned against halting the opening of the bridge. Their statements emphasize economic stability. They stress the importance of predictable cross-border movement. Business groups do not typically insert themselves into political disputes unless something tangible is at stake. That is not coincidence. It is constraint. Pressure only works when domestic costs remain manageable. But infrastructure choke points generate domestic costs quickly. If access is delayed, manufacturers in Michigan feel it first. Assembly lines feel it. Exporters feel it. Transport operators feel it. Warehouses feel it. And when those sectors feel friction, feedback loops activate. Political actors respond to economic pressure. That feedback loop narrows room for maneuver, which changes the equation. Let us restate the confirmed structure clearly. A threat was made to block the opening of the bridge unless compensation is provided. Major reporting indicates that Canada financed the project. Ownership is shared between Canada and a U.S. state. American labor and materials were involved in construction. Executive permit authority has been cited as a potential lever. Regional business organizations have signaled concern about disruption. Those are the documented pillars. Now consider the analytical layer. When executive authority intersects with cross-border infrastructure, leverage becomes procedural rather than physical. The physical bridge remains in place. The steel does not move. The concrete does not disappear. What shifts is timing. What shifts is authorization. What shifts is access. If access can be delayed, negotiation dynamics change. If negotiation dynamics change, leverage emerges. But leverage is not limitless. It exists within constraints. Those constraints are economic. They are political. They are institutional. The United States remains Canada's largest trading partner. That asymmetry has historically shaped bargaining power. However, trade structures today are more distributed than they were in previous decades. Canada has expanded trade relationships with Europe. It participates in major trans-Pacific trade agreements. Diversification does not erase dependence. It reduces exclusivity, and exclusivity is what amplifies leverage. When alternatives exist, even partially, leverage weakens at the margins. That broader context influences how infrastructure threats function. If a permit becomes the focal point of a dispute, the immediate impact is not confined to bilateral rhetoric. It affects domestic stakeholders. It affects regional economies. It affects supply chain expectations. When those domestic stakeholders speak publicly, they act as counterweights. Counterweights limit escalation. This does not eliminate executive authority. It balances it. Executive discretion may allow procedural delay. Economic interdependence increases the cost of exercising that discretion. This is where incentives matter. The incentive to threaten can be immediate. The incentive to follow through must pass through economic and political filters. Those filters include business communities. They include manufacturers. They include state-level officials. They include workers whose livelihoods depend on cross-border flow. Infrastructure disputes are rarely isolated. They ripple outward. That ripple effect feeds back into decision-making, which complicates escalation. None of this guarantees a specific outcome. It clarifies the environment. A threat has been articulated. Difficulty challenges the financial premise. Permit authority provides a mechanism. Economic networks impose constraints. Canada's visible response has been procedural. Funding structures have been reiterated. Shared ownership has been emphasized. The tone has avoided rhetorical escalation. That approach narrows the dispute to facts. When disputes are anchored in documentation, narrative elasticity decreases. When economic actors signal concern, escalation becomes more expensive. When trade diversification reduces exclusivity, leverage becomes less absolute. This episode illustrates something broader. Infrastructure is not just physical. It is legal. It is institutional. Steel can be fabricated. Concrete can be poured. But access is governed by authority. Authority intersects with incentive. Incentives intersect with costs. And costs shape outcomes. The bridge itself is not the core story. The story is the intersection of permit authority and economic interdependence. It is the tension between executive discretion and regional constraint. It is the calculation of whether procedural leverage outweighs domestic costs. Power in geopolitics rarely resides in the loudest statement. It resides in the procedural detail. It resides in the ability to authorize or delay. It resides in the reaction of economic stakeholders. Infrastructure may appear fixed. Leverage is fluid. Access can be accelerated. Access can be delayed. But every delay generates ripple effects. And ripple effects generate political response. From here, any attempt to escalate through procedural obstruction must account for those ripple effects. That does not eliminate leverage. It raises its price. And when the price of escalation rises, the math changes. That is the structure beneath the headline. That is the architecture beneath the rhetoric. The bridge is steel and financing. Leverage is access and authority. And when authority meets economic interdependence, escalation becomes costly.